background. So the body of work that I showed today is my personal analysis of broad root cause for this issue. It's not an aligned view in the orthodoxy, okay? It's not all out there and some of the stuff you won't have really heard before, okay? It's an engineer analysis based on data, as I said, and it's not a medical study or medical guidance. Now I have got a doctor locally in Maynooth who I've been through this with and is very glad to say I can refer people to him. So if anyone here is interested in the material and wants to take personal action, it's not in my direction. But I will give you a doctor who is incredibly knowledgeable around fat and carbohydrate metabolism, blood cholesterol, lipidology, the lipoproteins, and he's produced many papers and published. Dr. Neville Wilson in Maynooth, so really good guy. He gives more specific advice relative to the other advice I mentioned earlier that was generic. So it's a study of biochemistry and it's not nutrition-y stuff and fads. It's a personal experiment with n equals 1, and I'll show you at the end what I did with my metrics. And it's obviously not a prospective clinical trial, you know, with around 100 people randomly assigned. It's leveraging a vast canon of experts' work, so I have pulled out from people all over the world for the last 50 years, and I've pulled out the best. And it's based on established science and literature. It's not based on the BS books out there. As I said up front, I was not going to go and start reading books about this stuff. Okay, here's some experts in the journey. I mentioned Dr. Neville Wilson, good guy. Professor Robert Lustig, I'd recommend you watch some of his material online. He has YouTube videos. He's 15 years working with kids with obesity issues. He's a neuroendocrinologist, and he has cracked it, I think. I found him after I'd already come to my conclusion what the root cause was. Then I began to go out and find other people who I could validate my findings with, and there's lots of them out there. Dr. Peter Attia, great guy, mechanical engineer, aeronautical engineer. Then he became a surgeon and doctor through Stanford Medical School. All of his material as well will reflect some of what I'll show to you. So there are leading edge people who are, well, on the leading edge. All my slides will have A, B, or C on them. So when I'm showing slides with A, it's comparative analysis. It's epidemiological studies. It's correlations, but not causation. It's just things track with the problem and may, as a result, be worthy of further investigation. B is the root cause mechanisms, our root cause diagram, or over here the mechanistic evidence. So I'll show a lot of data that mechanistically links potential root causes to the problem, right? And C is the big one, the experimentation. That's the big enchilada. That's when you experiment and switch on and off, now you've got root cause. So that will be towards the end. So that, remember, C is big, okay? Cross it off. Root cause method. So now the problem, metabolic syndrome. How many people looked it up on the web? You saw the invite? No one.
We're too busy.
Too busy. I'd say look up some other stuff though, it's all the same. Sport perhaps. Good bad day. Right, okay. Alright, no, that's good, that's good. That'll loosen me up, relax me, a bit of that stuff. Okay, here's the trends. Now, we'll get on to metabolic syndrome in a moment. It's a little more technical, but I just put in a few slides at the suggestion of, I think it was Ian or one of the guys, just to show kind of broader background. So here's the increase in general in weight, and it started around the 70s really. USA leading the field, and then we got France, was pretty good, getting dragged along. Australia's got a particular problem. They got some severe budget problems in their health system in the coming 10 years because their diabetes has skyrocketed. And also Brazil isn't shown here as the highest increase in diabetes. The second derivative, their rate of increase is astronomical. China has a special government panel looking at how they're going to handle the healthcare costs in the coming decade because their diabetes is blowing through the roof, okay? And also we've got other countries like India, it's an exploding problem. Mexico as well in 1990 had effectively 0 overweight or obese, and now they're 70%, right, in 2 decades. 0 effectively to 70%. So if you have millions of years of evolution that have resulted in a human machine, how do you in 2 decades blow it out of the water, right? How do you do that? So we look at a bit of that. Here's diabetes. Yeah, it's more exponential than linear for weight. So diabetes is big in 2013, and it's getting bigger. This graph, I think, in the last couple of years is pretty much heading on up. Okay, very costly to the person, to health, to happiness, to mortality, and financially, and budgetary. Okay, so is it simply the calories? So would people here, who would agree that it's just the calories in, calories out? It's like, it's an energy balance, it's thermodynamics. A lot of people push that idea. Who believes here it's really just the calories? Anyone? It's just the calories, yeah? It's just an energy balance. The problem with that, and I get into it shortly, is that applies to a steam engine, okay? It does not apply to a very complex mammalian organism with a very complex hormonal system that manages and regulates appetite. And that's the difference. But it is widely held view that it's just the calories. The graph also says that. So it's a half-truth. And you saw the quote earlier. Technically it's true, but it's what drives the extra calories that are being consumed. That's the key point. And the view that it's simply, we're just deciding to eat more, is the falsehood that's buried within it. Okay? So the predicted cost, this is from Professor Lustig, and he runs an excellent series on YouTube called The Skinny on Obesity, and it really goes through at a very high level all of the modern problems and their origins in 8 parts, and I highly recommend it, and it's on your list. I think it could be more like 50% of global healthcare costs, and I'm not going to put a reference on this, it's approximate. I've done a back of the envelope, and I estimate 1 to 2 trillion for the top 20 GDP countries. It could be more, it could be less, but it gives context to the scale of the problem, okay? So here we are, the problem definition. Metabolic syndrome is if you have 3 or more of these risk factors, okay? And I'll go through them, not too deep. High blood triglyceride level, greater than 1.5 millimoles per litre. That's one of the primary factors, and it's the triglycerides in your serum, in your blood. And it leads to a lot of problems, and it correlates very strongly with disease. Low good cholesterol. Has anyone heard of the good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol from a blood test? Yeah. There's a good cholesterol, it's HDL, it's high density lipoprotein, and I'm pleased to say it really is good. That's not a half-truth, that's really true. The high density lipoprotein scours and picks up cholesterol fragments, brings them back to the liver for processing. Generally, it's a very positive thing. If you're low on that, it's a problem. Waist measurement, they don't talk about general BMI because it's the visceral adipose tissue in between the organs that's indicative of disease. So it's more the waist measurement, obesity. And the definitions vary. The World Health Organization, various other health bodies, they all have slightly different values in here, so I put a range there. Blood pressure elevated, key risk factor. I won't go through the mechanisms, I just say blood pressure elevated. Everyone's familiar with the 120 over 80, it should be. Well, greater than 135 over 80 is specifically a risk factor for metabolic syndrome. And high blood sugar with glycemic control. So your body controls your blood sugar very, very accurately. Blood sugar is needed for the brain. The rest of your body can run on other things, and I might touch on that later, depending on what you're eating. But sugar is very important. If it goes too high though, you go into a diabetic coma. So diabetics who need to take insulin to manage their blood sugar, if they don't do it, the sugar rises, and it rises quite quickly. Your body controls the glucose between around 3.6 and 5.6. Back in the 40s, people would have generally been around 4.8. Now they're generally in the mid-5s, or like at least in the low 5s, because things have changed. Okay? So there are the risk factors. This is a small selection of the more recognizable diseases. The true list goes on for a couple of pages, because they're all inflammatory diseases, and metabolic syndrome is indicative of inflammatory diseases, and that's where the body's tissues are swelling. Atherosclerosis, the expansion of your arterial wall when it has basically sterols or cholesterol inside it, and it causes the body to attack with macrophage, and then you have inflammation. So they're all inflammatory and autoimmune diseases where your body's not happy, it begins to try and fix a problem, and then it contributes to the problem. So there's a huge list of those, and the diseases of modernity is another description. Okay, so has everyone got that? The high triglycerides. Does anyone notice something that's missing?
Bad cholesterol is missing.
Nice. Bad cholesterol is missing. The reason bad cholesterol is missing, the LDL or low density lipoprotein, is because it's highly discordant. So the LDL bad cholesterol poorly correlates with disease and heart disease. Okay? Briefly, your high triglycerides over your HDL, that ratio, is around 15 times more predictive than your LDL. And the reason is that your bad cholesterol, and Dr. Neville Wilson in Maynooth, I think it's a great phrase, he wrote a paper on it, he calls it LDL, the other good cholesterol. Because people can have a very high LDL and it's all good. Cholesterol is the molecule of life. No cholesterol, no life. Cholesterol is used for all your hormones, building all your cells, it's used for everything. You can have a high LDL and it's all good because it's pattern A and it's good LDL. However, you can have a fraction within it, and it's only around 10 or 15 years ago they developed the technology. You can have a fraction of that that is pattern B, small dense LDL. That's what causes atherosclerosis. That's what causes inflammation. So in your standard cholesterol test, you really need to look at the triglycerides over the HDL ratio, because in the absence of a test to find the fraction of your bad cholesterol that really is bad, okay, in the absence of that, you can't get it in Ireland. It's a nuclear magnetic resonance particle count, or a VAT panel. You can get it in the UK and America, and I was going to try and get it, but I don't know if you can send the blood and all that stuff and say. But that's it anyway. Your bad cholesterol can be all good, or it can contain a bad component. And the reason it's not in here is because bad cholesterol is not a good correlator. Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I would have forgotten to say that one too. Okay, so how many people do you think, 0 to 20% of America, because I got the best data, have metabolic syndrome and a predisposition to these inflammatory autoimmune diseases that are the big diseases? Hands up, 0 to 20% of all Americans.
20.
That's quite a lot. 20? Okay, a 20 there. Anyone else? 20 to 30%? Up to nearly a
You
third?
were giving me options. I thought you were saying between 0 and 20.
You're 20. He said 20. Okay, so we got a handful there. 30 to 40%. And we're approaching half the country. Okay, we got a good few there. 40 to 50%, up to half the country. Okay, and over 50%, more than half. Okay, yeah. Anyway, you can probably guess where I'm going. Yeah, it's over 50% of the population. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease that used to be unheard of, and it was only for alcoholics who had alcoholic fatty liver disease, it's now around 50% too. Doctors don't really even take much notice of it anymore. It's becoming a norm. Yes, people who are very overweight, 80% will have the syndrome in America, but then again 40% of people with a moderate BMI will also have it. So it's not just overweightness, it's more complex than that. Your system can be metabolically deranged, not necessarily with accompanying weight, okay? So that's the problem definition. There's one phenomenon, and it is a syndrome in itself, that ties together this whole shooting match, and that is the phenomenon of insulin resistance. And I'm going to have to describe that for around 10 or 12 minutes, because it's fundamental before we go on to the two root causes, okay? And it ties together, and all the leading edge people in the field would be cognizant of this. Okay, that's the problem definition. Key concept, insulin resistant, and for that we'll have to go through a very quick version of an endocrinology class. And I'll start with insulin and glucagon. So you have a lot of hormones in your body, and the hormones are pivotal in controlling your appetite and your energy metabolism. A couple of them were only discovered in the last 10 years, so again, I reviewed this with a family friend who's a doctor, and as we went through the content, he acknowledged, he said, look, he said, yeah, I know it's probably right, but he said, you know, a GP won't know this kind of detail. A lot of it is in the last 10 or 15 years. So there is a lot of new science. So anyway, insulin is the master hormone, and what happens generally, when you take sugar or simple carbohydrates, you know, refined carbs, which are mostly long chains of glucose, and amylase in your body breaks them down. You know, if you take, I suppose, just white wheat flour and pasta, a lot of glucose, and your body splits it really fast, so it becomes glucose. So all the glucose and sugary carbohydrates give you a high blood sugar. Now also protein does cause an insulin reaction also, but to a lesser extent. Fat doesn't cause any insulin response, worth a damn. High blood sugar tells your pancreas to release insulin, because blood sugar is dangerous. If you don't release insulin, you'll die. So the pancreas releases insulin in response to high blood sugar, and the insulin does a very important function. There's insulin receptors on all your body's cells, and all your muscular tissue, and all over the place. What the insulin does is it shunts the sugar energy into those cells. It opens the doors and it shoves in the glucose, okay? It also shoves the glucose into the liver, because if you have a lot of glucose, you're going to want to put it somewhere, and maybe your muscles, you know, you're watching X Factor and the muscles aren't doing a whole lot. And you say, hey, I've had enough, right? So it will shunt the glucose into the liver, and it'll make glycogen. Now, glycogen is simply a complex that's essentially glucose molecules, but they're in a safe storage form in the liver. And the liver can put around 400 or 500 calories worth of glucose in there. So there's another place it can go. And essentially then, it lowers the blood sugar. You know, the tissues, the cells take up the glucose, aided by insulin, and the liver takes it up and makes glycogen. So that's all good. We won't go through glucagon much. It's kind of interesting because I'd be running a lot of glucagon all the time, but most people would be running insulin all the time. But what it is the opposite. If you're running a low blood sugar because you're not doing this, glucagon actually releases sugar out of the fat cells, because in the fat cells you got triglycerides, there's a glycerol backbone, 3 fatty acids. Glucagon moves sugar energy back out of the fat cells and burns it, and dietary fat burns that, and it also raises blood sugar by depleting your glycogen and getting sugar back out into your circulatory system. So they're kind of yin and yang, but insulin is the master. Glucagon is the little guy. When insulin is high, glucagon is nowhere to be seen. When insulin is shoving glucose energy into fat cells, because that's another thing it does. Insulin makes fat. It is the thing which makes fat. Glucagon is suppressed and down-regulated. You can't be making fat and shoving sugar in the same time you're releasing it, okay? So that's important, so I spent quite a bit of time on that. Ghrelin and leptin are 2 more hormones discovered in the last decade, and they are very important. Ghrelin's quite simple, really, and all of these act through the hypothalamus, just behind your eyes. They tell your brain what's going on. Ghrelin is simply when your stomach or intestine is contracted, it sends a signal to the brain, you know, hey, maybe eat something, okay? So if you're hungry, if I'm hungry now in the last, say, 12 weeks, I'll only have ghrelin as a component of my appetite control system, because I've sorted out insulin, glucagon, and I've sorted out leptin. So all I have is ghrelin. So all I'll feel is an ache in my stomach. That's the ghrelin. That's the signal. Okay? We won't talk too much about it because it's relatively not so important. Leptin, however, is important. So your fat cells, your adipose tissue, are not just sitting there. They're organs. And the visceral adipose tissue, or the intra-organal fat between your organs that's generated in the liver area, is particularly active as an organ. And it releases cytokines, hormones, and a lot of different things. But leptin, put simply, comes from your adipose tissue and signals your brain, we've got long-term storage, okay? The ghrelin's short-term, and when insulin spikes, it tells your brain, you know, hey, we got a lot of sugar here, you know, don't worry. Leptin is a long-term signal to say, hey, we've got reserves. If there's a bit of a famine, right, we're probably okay. That's when it's working properly, okay? Now, key points, because again, this is what is very important to get. So insulin gets glucose energy into the liver and muscle. It opens the doors, the insulin receptors. It drives glucose energy into fat. If there's any excess at all, it'll take that glucose and it'll fill up fat cells. It's the primary driver. In healthy people, it does signal an appetite drop. So elevated insulin signals the brain to say, hey, we got some short-term sugar coming in here, you can back off. But if chronically driven too hard and your insulin levels are elevated over a long period of time, your body begins to say no to insulin. And what it does is it begins to drop its insulin receptors, okay? When your body, which has enough sugar and enough glucose, and it's getting high insulin all the time, begins to drop its receptors, what happens is you get a self-reinforcing feedback loop. So what happens when the receptors drop but you continue to provoke insulin? Well, insulin now is going to go higher because the receptors have gone lower, down-regulated. It still needs to do its job to shove glucose energy into pretty much everywhere, but the receptors are lower, so insulin will elevate further. And that's a self-reinforcing feedback loop, and particularly for an engineering audience, you should resonate with it. The insulin goes higher. What happens when the insulin goes higher? Well, you get more insulin resistance. You get less receptors. Now the insulin goes higher again. So there's a self-reinforcing feedback loop goes on. It's not just that the bad stuff in causes a problem. Over time, it tends to reinforce itself, and insulin resistance results. The body says more and more no, and the insulin rises. And also you get appetite dysfunction, because as the brain becomes insulin resistant, and it begins to not listen to the signal, it perceives actually that it's lower on energy than it is. And that signaling causes more consumption. So insulin resistance is very, very pathogenic or destructive, because it feeds on itself over time. And we've got a chronic problem here, and this just shows one of the mechanisms. Now, leptin, which is another safety warning, and remember it took millions of years for this system to develop, and it is beautifully complex, and it works extremely well until it's deranged by inputs. The fat cells release the leptin, they signal the long-term we got energy, but leptin is blocked by insulin resistance. So hey presto, when you become insulin resistant, right, and you get into this problem that a lot of people have, to be honest, and the 5 metrics I showed are also metrics in metabolic syndrome of insulin resistance, they have shown that the leptin signaling begins to get down-regulated and blocked. And also, there's another feedback loop. So now you've got another destructive feedback loop that's self-reinforcing, okay? So now the machine and the control system that worked for millions of years is now really deranged in multiple self-reinforcing ways. And I am overstressing this, but it was a point made in a trial run of this to really get that point across, right? And if you create particularly abdominal fat, then you get leptin resistance, which unto itself is a phenomenon. That the increased levels of leptin over time cause a leptin resistance effect. So the leptin becomes dysfunctional also. So as you can see now, your primary appetite control systems, you can get totally deranged, and they tend to drive themselves after a while. It's not like you're just making them bad and then kind of not making them bad or making them bad. They tend to drive themselves. And this is one of the reasons that diets are so hard, because if you're eating the wrong stuff, it's just extremely hard to cause an insulin spike and then have a low afterwards, and then an insulin spike and a low afterwards, and you've got a lot of this stuff going on. So that's, are there any questions specifically on that, or it's just a...
Time frame either to see those changes.
This is chronic. So this is over many years insulin resistance develops. Now in the early years, you know, you will be beginning to switch on these loops more and more, and then these loops will take over for you and ensure into the future that it gets worse and worse.
Sorry,
Yeah.
on that initial process to kind of kick off the initial instability, what would be the drivers of that initial instability to start off the vicious circle?
Well, we look at the root causes, and yeah, I would suggest one of the root causes is the primary factor. And go back.
Reverse it.
Oh. Time frame to reverse that, well, it depends, varying metrics. So in 2 or 3 weeks, my blood pressure went from hypertensive down to pretty much normal. And the same, a friend of mine 10 weeks ago, he's a fairly techie guy, I told him this one night, and the next day he did everything. And his blood pressure now is down to normal too. So blood pressure and some of those things will come down quickly. Unsurprisingly, the insulin resistance leads, and I just grabbed this off the web, this diagram. So this is pretty much kind of accepted. And there we've got our 5. So we've got a disparity here now. We are saying insulin resistance causes the metabolic syndrome. But then we're also saying that, well, excess weight, excessive carb, sedentary, and all these things cause insulin resistance. So weight is kind of causing insulin resistance, which causes excess weight, and these things, or is it the insulin resistance, even in the absence of excess weight, that causes all the problem? And we saw earlier 40% of people without much excess weight had metabolic disease. So what I'd suggest is, and some people out there would concur with me, and they would be pretty leading edge people, is insulin resistance the chicken or the egg? The orthodox view is, well, it's the egg. You know, you get too heavy, and then through the mechanisms I described, you get insulin resistant. And I would suggest that insulin resistance is more the chicken, right? Insulin resistance drives the most destructive type of fat, which drives a lot of discordant processes. Insulin resistance drives excess weight. I mean, diabetics, even in the 1900s, there are pictures where they inject insulin, they often get massive adipose deposits. Insulin drives energy into fat. There's a great little experiment, thought experiment, that Lustig actually has in one of his lectures, and I'm going to steal it from him. If you were walking along and you were taking 2,000 calories in energy in, and you needed 2,000 calories in energy to be happy and energetic, enjoying yourself, okay? If I went up behind you secretly and
My career is gone.
which I never would do, and I injected you with a bolus of insulin, what would happen is a proportion of those 2,000 calories would be shunted into fat, okay? You can't change that. That's what insulin does. If you put in a big bolus, it'll be shunted into fat. So let's say it's 400 calories. Person's walking along, doesn't know, they kind of feel hungry, because now they only got 1,600, right? So they're thinking, right, okay, I'm hungry. They don't know that it's been sequestered into fat, and a pound of fat is 3,500 calories, so it's only 1/8 of a pound that's gone in there, so it's very little. But they're hungry, so they eat another 400 calories. That's a natural reaction, right? You respond to your appetite. So now they're back to 2,000, but the insulin that I put in the bolus of is going to take 100 of those, like the Tax or PRSIs, straight off the top, into fat. Now they got 1,900, so now they need a snack or two. Probably a high sugar, probably carby kind of cereal bar type thing, right? So they get back to their 2,000, but they've taken in 2,500. Now that illustrates the principle. If you're running high insulin, a lot of the calories you're taking in, you don't really have access to, because you're driving a process of fat storage that you don't actually want or need. I can't remember the last famine we had in the Western world, you know? These processes were there for a reason. Insulin resistance, some experts talk about it as a survival thing. Towards the end of the summer, where there's a lot of fruit and a lot of abundance, insulin resistance will drive body storage. It'll get you through the winter. You'll live versus die. Nowadays, that's reversed, okay? That's the unfairness of it all. So insulin is a severe problem, and when it's elevated, it's a very severe problem. And I would say, yes, that it's a primary driver rather than just a byproduct of building up too much weight. Okay? Again, the self-reinforced loop warning. You'll see this everywhere. The insulin resistance drives the weight, drives the insulin resistance. Da, da, da. It's the way it works. Okay? So, I mentioned earlier hypothesis resistance, yeah, which I took from insulin resistance, but it's academia and all tend to stick with hypothesis. The hypothesis here is that bad food that elevates insulin and causes obesity causes insulin resistance. The old model does acknowledge the self-reinforcing feedback loop here. Then you get hyperinsulinemia, or elevated insulin in the blood that's out of control. Your glycemic control is gone, and your sugar is still high, even with all this extra insulin, because all the receptors are turned off, right? You're in a diseased state. Your pancreas that produces the insulin is not, does not last forever. And under this assault, the cells, the islet cells, the beta cells that produce the insulin in your pancreas get exhausted, and they die. And then you're a type 2 diabetic, because your pancreas can no longer supply this excessive demand for insulin, and the cells die, and then you need to inject insulin for the rest of your life. And that's the way it is. So it was largely understood, but the new model, and there was an idea as well that sedentary and greed and all and bad food led to whatever heaviness and then insulin resistance, blah. But I would say that this is the appropriate model. That taking stuff that generates hyperinsulinemia chronically over a long period of time, generates the appetite derangement that we talked about, generates obesity from that appetite derangement combined with the bad food, and then also has insulin resistance in the cycle, that this is a more appropriate, a more truthful message. And it's very easy to just say this one, right? Remember the quote at the start? Very easy. Simple little soundbite. Oh yeah, we're just eating too much. Oh yeah, it's not that simple. It's a control system problem, and it depends on the substrate that goes in. And I'm going to put those in again. I probably overdid those, but everyone's going to get it. Okay? Right. Now, that is insulin resistance and the basic hormonal system that's finely tuned, and it's like a chemical plant. If you have insulin resistance and your appetite control system, hormonal system's out of whack, it's like a chemical plant with all the gauges or, you know, the steam coming out. Think of a cartoon kind of with the fella running around trying to control it. You're trying to control your intake, right? But all the measurements and the control system's all awry. Someone's put in a whole different line of code into the central control system. The whole thing is a mess. Now, if you get that all fixed and you get all the gauges working and you get the control system back the way it's meant to be, then you can control with just one hand on the rudder. And that's basically what I've done. It's not magic. I just understood this stuff 10 or 12 weeks ago. And now if I want to move any body marker anywhere, I just move it there. And it won't cost me much of a thought. Okay? They're the key concepts of insulin resistance and endocrinology. Sugar. A few people here who've heard some of this, probably guessing this might be something to do with it. You could be right. Sugar, sucrose, simple sugar comes from beet and it comes from cane, and it's come around really the late 1800s and early 1900s is when the production ramped up. It's a big money product, and a lot of new issues arose like gout and other things in the early 1900s relating to that. But anyway, the simple hydrogen bond here, you got fructose and sucrose, or sorry, fructose and glucose. So glucose is the sugar of life. You know, it's relatively well adapted by the body. Fructose is slightly different matter. And the high fructose corn syrup you hear about, I wouldn't worry about the 42. It's really more fructose than glucose. But otherwise it's similar. It's 55 fructose and 45 glucose. And the traditional table sugar is 50-50. So not too much difference. Now it is different because the fructose is free. And there is some latest work that suggests that the fructose molecule being free in the high fructose corn syrup is a problem. But I haven't got the data yet for that, so I'm not really going to get into that, okay? They're largely much of a muchness. Okay, so that's sugar. There's refineries here that take 100% glucose from corn syrup. It is 100% glucose, because glucose is sugar of life, the corn is full of glucose. And refineries then convert over half of the glucose to fructose. Now that costs money, you know guys, that's a value add step. And it's a big refinery, it's massive throughput. Anyone know why they changed the glucose to fructose? Sweeter, yeah. So fructose is 1.4 sweetness and glucose is 0.7. It's sweeter, you sell more, you eat more, blah, blah, blah. You do some more other things too. So that's basically it, yeah. That's how you create it. And the Japanese discovered that in the 50s. The enzyme that will convert glucose to fructose. They didn't really use it much themselves actually, but it got adopted in the 60s in America. And there were some jokes it was the revenge for the war or something, you know. But anyway, that's what it is. So once they had the enzyme, they industrially applied it. And it's very, very cheap. So traditional sugar is much more expensive. The high fructose corn syrup, you got massive corn crops, it's very cheap. So part of the problem, I would say, is an economic problem. The substrate is so cheap. I mean, it's just irresistible to put in everything. So they do. Okay, it's in everything. So back in 1957, we're talking correlation now, we had Professor John Yudkin. I would love to meet him. I would buy him a drink. He had a lot of pot.
Sugar.
I'd sneak sugar into it. No, I wouldn't. So he did lots of reports, and he ended up in a lot of controversial with other people who believed fat was a problem. But he was showing that really the sugar correlated better and the fat didn't correlate. And he also highlighted that correlation was not causation. So Yudkin was a smart guy, right? Very smart. He wrote, I think, Pure White Poison and a couple other books. And he knew in the 70s this stuff was a serious problem, especially as the ingestion rates increased. But he also put in the book the correlation between the heart disease and radio and television licenses, and he showed a much better correlation. And he made the point in his own paper, look, I'm not saying that this is definite from the correlation. I'm saying it from my rat studies, I'm saying it from my mechanistic, I'm saying it from everything. And he was also saying that the fat didn't correlate, so it didn't even get a seat at the table until we'd sorted this out. But, and you see there 0.05, and here the fat doesn't correlate. But he wasn't heard anyway, and the rest is history. I had difficulty getting good data of sugar consumption in the last 5 decades versus disease, so I took this directly from a big Excel sheet from the National Centre of Health and Statistics, the Centre of Disease Control, the American government. And I back calculated from the percentage of calories today, or per day, from different categories, because they don't show the grams per day. So I got the percentage of calories and then the calories per gram of fat and the calories gram of sugar. And I back calculated the main groups, like males of all different ages, and basically to get a proper correlation that I'd be happy enough with. Now I picked the axes, so I could have this ramp here, an axis of 0 to 100, and it would look much smaller. I could move it left or right, that's my choice. I have put it where it's most dramatic, but it doesn't mean it's false, it's just I've chosen it to track for visual appeal. So that's the increase in sugar from 85 grams up to around 125 grams. And that's from, you know, multiple sources averaged together. They're all close, but it's to get the best graph. And you can see the correlation. So the first test is, does your potential root cause at least track with the problem? And I think on a Friday evening, if there's an issue on the line and the scrap rate had gone up all week and people thought it was humidity, and the humidity had tracked like those bars with the scrap rate, I think the engineer might go home early and just leave an instruction to production to get the humidity back under control, fix the system, and have an expectation on Monday it'd probably be grand. Okay? That'd be fair enough, but it wouldn't be necessarily true. So that's the correlation. Here's another broader, over a couple of 100 years, the correlation of obesity with the sugar input. There's the 2 world wars. And it's mostly British data up to here, and then the American data takes over. So again, it's just a correlation, right? In Mexico, their sugar consumption's gone through the roof in the last 2 decades. Not their fat, nothing else but sugar. Kids in the schools now, sugar or soft drinks are cheaper than water, because quality water is hard to get. So Mexico has just blown off the planet with diabetes. And, you know, so there are correlations all over the place. I won't go through these, but I mean, there are more just correlations. 15 grams a day from fruits and vegetables, fructose, up to around 72 grams a day now for adolescents in the States. Here's just carbohydrate, a big chunk of which is sugar, grams per day, again correlating with obesity over the last few decades. Yeah, quick reminder, starch and sugar, right? Sugar is glucose and fructose. I'm going to talk mainly about fructose as being the pathogenic component. But a lot of glucose also stimulates the insulin and proceeds towards insulin resistance. So it's kind of a two-hander here. You're taking in sugar, you're taking glucose, is punching your insulin up. Fructose doesn't, the body doesn't produce insulin based on fructose because the body can't see fructose. Because for millions of years we got bugger all fructose, right? So the body can deal with it, but in a special way. You'll see that in a moment, okay? The simple carbs and breads, even brown bread to be honest, a lot of it's white bread with a dye in it, I would say. I don't know that, but it's not really whole grain. It's not really whole grain, you know. Whole grain bread is if you get whole grain, you know, grains and crunch them up and make your bread. You know, I don't know what's in it. I'm not making the judgment, I don't know what's in it. So anyway, in the sugar goals, right? Now, here's your liver hepatocyte. So the reason I'm showing the liver is because the liver does a lot of work. We heard about fatty liver disease. We know the liver pumps out the bad cholesterol. Endogenous lipid production is from your liver. What you eat in terms of fat or cholesterol doesn't really translate into your blood cholesterol. It's mostly endogenous, okay? Or the body creates it from scratch. So I'm not going to go through all of Lustig's stuff. He goes through the full metabolism of glucose, of alcohol, and of fructose, okay? Coming in as sucrose, the 50-50. I won't do it because you'll all fall asleep. But I will do the sugar itself. I will mention that 120 calories of glucose, on average, 24 will end up in your liver to be processed and managed, okay? Because most of the glucose, as we said earlier, insulin will open the door, it's the sugar of life, the glucose will go into your cells, be burnt as energy, your brain runs on glucose, not mine, oddly enough. That's a different story. I run around 60% dehydroxybutyrate, but that's because I would be in a ketogenic type diet all the time. But anyway, that's a separate lecture. Most people run on glucose. Maybe it makes me more animated, who knows? Right, no, it makes no difference. It's only brain food, it doesn't make any difference. So okay, we've got the glucose, most of it goes into your body, in relatively healthy, except for insulin resistance that does too much of it. Okay, but moderate amounts, not too bad. Alcohol is the poison, okay? It's the fourth food group. There's fat, there's carbohydrate, there's protein, and there's alcohol. Alcohol is fermented sugar, it's a different kind of thing. But there actually are, there are four. I was surprised that alcohol was the fourth group, because it's not like the others. So, alcohol, most of it goes to the liver. 10% goes to your brain, that's why we love it. It has that psychoactive effect. and 10% gets absorbed by the gut. But 80% of it goes to the liver to be managed, right? Managed as a problem if it doesn't go there. It goes down the main portal vein into the liver. Now, the sugar, which is half glucose and half fructose, all fructose must go to the liver, right? The body is not set up for fructose. So, traditionally, over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, they estimate there's 1.5 spoons of sugar came in per day into the human body. And we're adapted accordingly. You do get fructose from fruit, but it might be 6 or 7%. And it's hugely attenuated by the fiber in the fruit, right? It's very slowly absorbed, and this is a rate thing as well. It's the rate of fructose going to the liver that's as important as the amount. So our bodies are not really set up for fructose. The GLUT4 receptor in all your body cells will take in the glucose, the insulin will spike, and it'll do all its stuff. Fructose, no. Straight to the liver, manage that crap down there, son. Okay? That's it. So let's look. GLUT5 receptor in the liver. In fairness, we have had fructose over the millennia, so there are ways of dealing with it. Fructose comes in, right? There's your mitochondria, there your energy production line. I won't go into detail here. The adenosine triphosphate is the energy molecule in your body and all your cells, and it's used to start converting this stuff. Okay, but what it does is all the phosphates need to be managed as a waste product, and there's various enzymes to mop up all those phosphates and say, what are we going to do with these? Well, we make them into uric acid and pass it out in the urine. Anyone know what uric acid causes in disease? Gout. Yeah. Gout's making a comeback. Gout's making a comeback. Okay, what it does also though, besides gout, and here's the rapid change in my blood pressure over only a couple of weeks. In your vessels, your body, again, like the appetite, has an excellent blood pressure control system. You know, millions of years gave it a great system, and it looks after a lot. And the endothelium, the cell layer in the lumen or the inside of your vessels, there's enzymes there that produce nitrous oxide, and that manages your blood pressure and dilation and keeps everything good, because high blood pressure damages your system. So your body manages it. However, uric acid interrupts the enzymes that produce the nitrous oxide. So you become depleted in nitrous oxide directly because of the uric acid. Okay? It's a known mechanism. And I suspect, and I'd be agreed with by these various professors and whatnot, that the uric acid, that's the main pathway by which you collapse your blood pressure. And a friend of mine in 10 weeks lost a stone of water, has transformed himself, and his blood pressure's gone right down to normal. You know. But again, I showed him all this, so he understood it, so he was able to take action. Okay? And he owes me. In fact, this now, there is a cover charge for this. See the hat? There's a hat at the door? Okay. Right, so here we are, MS number 1, metabolic syndrome, hypertension. Let's go along. So pyruvate, you get a lot of pyruvate because all the fructose is going to your liver. So you take a big shot, particularly with a liquid beverage. You know, you get a very high rate of absorption into your liver. It'll rocket down the portal vein, and whereas if you're running up and down the stairs and eating a little bit of sugar, the fructose will go across into a 3-carbon glucose and will go into glycogen, and it'll be safe, right? You know, you're eating a pizza and drinking a Coke, watching telly. That's not going to happen. A lot of it's going to go down here. And pyruvate goes into your mitochondria. You've got the Krebs cycle that produces energy from substrates. You'll be breathing in oxygen, breathing out CO2. You'll be using more ATP, or sorry, releasing ATP. The ATP used here to process this stuff, well, you release ATP here to provide energy for your body. But you also produce a lot of citrate, okay? Also what happens is xylulose S-phosphate, an enzyme, is produced when you metabolize fructose, and I believe it's similar to alcohol. I haven't shown alcohol, but remember, alcohol is mostly to liver, fructose is mostly to liver, right? You produce this, and that produces carbohydrate receptor entity binding protein, and that gets your fat production line going. So people think they eat sugar, well, at least I'm not eating fat. Well, you are. Sugar is fat, because sugar gets processed into fat through de novo lipogenesis, the creation of lipids, fats from scratch, right? That production line gets going, a higher intake at a higher rate, a faster production line. To race along, okay? What it produces is the ApoB bad particle, and I think I mentioned earlier, it's not the cholesterol that causes the risk, it's a preponderance of small dense LDL particles with the apolipoprotein B protein that encapsulates them, and the particle count is important. So here you start generating VLDL, very low density lipoprotein. It's triglyceride rich, okay? It's cholesterol depleted. It will act with your HDL and give it triglycerides, and if you cause your HDL to have other issues, your good cholesterol, it will increase your overall triglyceride in your blood, which is a master marker for disease. So here's how you really produce all these fats. And this is the thing that blew me away. I thought, well, hold on, I thought you eat all the fat and you get all the fat and cholesterol. That's back to the quote at the start. That's an easy soundbite, right? It's a half-truth. It's easy to say, and everyone, even so-called experts, will largely believe it, and they still do. But I'll show you some data around it in a minute. So there's your known mechanism. You pump in the sugar, you pump up your VLDL, you pump up your ApoB particles, you pump up your risk, your triglyceride, your HDL, the ratio of those is the master predictor. As we said earlier, it's not the LDL. Okay, so we have two more. Now, here's medical students taking glucose. I think 30% of their energy from glucose. And they looked at the postprandial after a meal rates of de novo lipogenesis. And they radio tracked the carbon in the fructose and the glucose. And the students with a big ballast of glucose didn't make any VLDL, didn't make the blood fats, right? Here's the fructose. 30% of the carbons ended up in fat, bad fat, right, from taking fructose. This was done quite a while back. I think that's 96. There's a lot of this stuff. You've got to dig for it and find it. You know, it's not very popular for some reason. Okay, so that's a quick, just looking at a little bit of experimentation. All of that, if you really ramp this up high, again, it's a rate problem. All the fat isn't going to be able to be constructed into ApoB lipoproteins. So some of it's going to fall off the wagon. And they're lipid droplets. So that's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's sugar-induced fatty liver disease. We say 50% of Americans. The lipid droplets, and they cause a lot of problems in themselves. A lot of problems. A lot of correlations to cancers and other things. It's very bad to have fats in your liver. Okay? Now, what have we got? Free fatty acids. Well, you've got a fat production line running, so you're going to be dumping some free fatty acids out through the hepatocyte and into your blood. And the free fatty acids will actually cause impacts to your skeletal muscular insulin resistance. So they'll make your insulin resistance worse. So any feedback loops here? You seeing it? So we're causing more problems with your insulin sensitivity. Okay? Also, the free fatty acids will affect the insulin secretion. Okay? So there's the self-reinforcement loop warning here as well. You create with acyl-CoA, which is a precursor to the fat generated from the sugar. You N-kinase, JUNK1. It's an enzyme, and it is junk. It causes systemic inflammation. Remember we talked earlier, inflammation. The fructose 1-phosphate, which is produced in the initial step in fructose, also promotes JUNK1. So that's an inflammatory molecule, and that's a problem. And what it does is it interferes with the insulin receptor system for the liver, and it actually causes hepatic insulin resistance. So now you've got more resistance to insulin, and you'll elevate more insulin to try and overcome it. Okay? There's your other. And you've got your sugar control, because you're driving an insulin problem, and that's a glycemic problem. So you've got a sugar control problem. Now if you're taking in sucrose, you've got the fructose doing this on the one hand, and you've got the glucose on the other hand, elevating your insulin and causing all the things we talked about earlier. So I think of it as a boxer coming into you, and it's a left and a right, and a left and a right. And that's what sugar does. In amounts. In small amounts, in fairness, these systems don't work nearly as much. So it is an amount and a rate thing. And I'm not going to get into how much. I have a simple rule, like Dr. Neville Wilson and Maynooth. The simple rule is 0. It's simple. Anyway, we never had it for millions of years, so it's okay, I don't need it now. More self-reinforcing loops. We also get that this system here does, I think it's serine phosphorylation, and it causes this serine receptor entity binding protein 1 to cause more of this enzyme to be produced. So now you've kind of got your Marley-1, it's been shoving your fat out, and now we've got 1.2. Needs more. Yeah, no problem. So let's get this second production line. We're going to get increased levels of this stuff. Okay? And how are we doing on time, by the way, guys? I'll just check, because I know where I am. 10 past 2, okay. So more self-reinforcement loops. I'm going to speed through the last. You've also got the triglycerides being generated. VLDL will promote obesity, central obesity, all around the liver where all the action is going on. Okay? There's another self-reinforcing loop there because the insulin response is causing more fat to be generated because the insulin's shoving stuff into fats. The glucose came into fructose, it's getting shoved into fat simultaneously as all this stuff is going on. You've got blood cholesterol rising, blood triglycerides rising. You've got the insulemia problem with appetite control, the signaling to the brain is getting blocked. Your leptin is blocking, especially if we've built up a lot of adipose tissue in the central area. And that will drive more appetite. So now you've got more self-reinforcing. So this whole system works fantastic if you don't put certain stuff into it. And when you put certain stuff into it, you start a discordant, dysfunctional process that I think, Jules, you asked, over time will continue and grow. You take out the substrate, and you asked how long. I don't think it's that long. For me, it wasn't that long, that's for sure. Just take out the guy I mentioned as well. Now, I have around 4 people now on this. They've all lost over a stone, and they're all feeling way better. But another advantage is your general energy levels are sustained. I could have a breakfast and not eat till 8 o'clock at night. I don't do that, but I could. I'd have no problem with energy levels. Before, I would have crashed and crashed and crashed. So, anyway, I'm going off the point here. Welcome to metabolic syndrome. Fructose fulfills every mechanistic pathway, and it's highly implicated, as well as correlating, as I showed you earlier. Okay? Any more on this? You want to see the experiments? Well, I've purchased quite a lot of them. They're hard to find, and the papers from the 50s. This was, I think, 1965. You can see they had people on their standard diet, then they dropped to no sugar, extreme. They gave them resistant starch with the same calorific value, right? It doesn't do any of the liver stuff, it's only glucose, and the body slowly gets the glucose out of this resistant starch. You can see what happened to their cholesterol and their triglycerides. Then they gave them a sugar diet. I think it's around 30% of calories in sugar, not a mile over the American diet. And this is what they did with them. And then they dropped them off again. So this cholesterol, you can sit as long as you want to the table and eat your cheese. You won't do jack. But if you put in this, you'll get a result. Here's the patients. They're all around in their 50s. They had varying degrees of mild heart disease and vascular function. So they were good people to look at. Around 50, had some issues. Because everyone's genetically different, and some people will actually process the sugar a lot better. What we're worried about is the 50 or 60% of people who won't. Okay? So these are the people who won't. There you can see this patient here was actually on quite a high sugar diet. When they put the high one, they didn't increase it much. Look at the triglyceride. You shouldn't really leave a doctor's office with a triglyceride that high, to be honest. Look where it went with the resistant starch, down to the 200 level. Back up again, back off. Do you see some engineering here? This stuff's hard to find. I love these engineering type real experiments, not the big population ones with a lot of confounding. Kind of, oh, you can interpret them any way you want. You can write a summary in an abstract that says whatever you want because what's in there is so vague. These are good. Here's another guy. I think he's a 48-year-old male, peripheral arterial occlusive disease, symptoms of vascular artery insufficiency. So all these peripheral artery disease. Look what he did. He was on a moderately high sugar, I'd say. Look what they did with the starch. Sugar in, sugar out. Okay? This is all blood triglyceride. This is the baddest of the bad cholesterol, guys. This is not some marker of something else. Here's the 5 patients. Carbohydrate is sucrose, carbohydrate is resistant starch. Total cholesterol, triglyceride, which is the biggie, and phospholipid. And all the cholesterol particles are phospholipid shells, so your phospholipid will track with your number of particles. There's very little of this work being done from 1960s, late 60s, early 70s. The fat heart hypothesis, the lipid hypothesis took over, and all funding went to fat studies. So now it's in the last few years, I can pick up again and get studies on sugar in the last few years. There's a big kind of wasteland in the middle, and no one is listening. Okay, here's some more. This is from Kimber Stanhope, University in California. Really good work. Great lecture series on this as well, 90 minutes and really nice. Here you've got the glucose versus fructose. So people were fed 25% glucose in glucose drinks over a 12-week period, ad libitum, where they could eat what they wanted at home, and 4-week periods where they were in a hospital. So it was properly done. And they looked at the overall body weight. Now the glucose and the fructose, not a whole lot of difference. But what was different in the MRI, the glucose promoted a lot more subcutaneous adipose tissue, right? Which is relatively safe fat. It's what nature would have had traditionally. You know, you can store it all around you and it's there to be burnt into energy. Very little visceral adipose tissue around the liver and organs. And again, we've looked through what fructose does around the liver, and it pumps out those VLDLs and free fatty acids. Here's the fructose in a perfectly split experiment. You can see its effect on visceral adipose tissue, right? That's what fructose brings to the party, visceral fat. and all that goes with it. Okay, postprandial triglycerides. Triglycerides are the bad thing. Don't mind your LDL. I mean, yeah, if you do a VAT panel on it, fine, but otherwise. Triglyceride over HDL. So here is, you can look at I'll just look at one of these. It's the, after the meal, a good while after, you have the fructose has a much higher impact on the triglyceride. Now if you look, where is it now, on the fasting triglyceride, which is the standard test, you won't really see the signal. And what Kimber's thesis was, fructose chronically elevates triglyceride. But a lot of the time they just look a short while later and you miss the signal. And how many times have engineers have you done that as well? It's a common mistake. You do the wrong test, you miss a chronic signal, and you do a test and say, hey, they're okay. And there's a few examples of this in the literature, quite a few. And I liken it to say, right, okay, take a non-smoker, make him smoke 40 a day for 4 weeks, and then do a PET scan and look for tumours. No tumours. What's this stuff about the cigarettes, right? Now, there's a certain industry probably done that experiment for you. You've got to know chronic versus acute poisoning, okay? This shows the chronic. Here is apolipoprotein B. Now, these are the particles. The cholesterol is entrapped in a molecule with triglyceride. The lipoprotein wraps around that particle and makes it talk to the rest of the body. The count of small dense particles of ApoB type is the big one for disease and risk. Here you can see again the fructose, that's the fasting. So the fasting now does show the signal, because you're looking at the right thing. You're not looking at the wrong thing, the LDL or whatever, you're looking at the right thing. And here is the ratio of the ApoB bad over the ApoB good lipoprotein particles, which is a huge measure. And you can see the fructose. Interestingly, the sugar with half fructose and glucose is worse. And my thought was it's because of the double punch. The glucose is raising your insulin, causing derangement there, and the fructose is coming in through the liver and causing a lot of action, right? So it's actually worse. And the research team wouldn't make a comment because they're a great team, but they didn't want to be saying a theory without having looked and proven it. Here's a couple more graphs. Here is boys and girls in the States, 20% obesity prevalence. These graphs here for boys and girls, all they did was they said they wouldn't drink soft drinks for the year. And here's where they were just let do what they wanted. So just an example of soft drinks alone. That's 1 year, right? Most of these things were talking 20 years. So you decide where the graph goes and where it ends. Obviously can't go over 100%, but right. And there's some more studies in the past as well, but I don't think we need to go into them. So that's sugar. So, any thoughts on sugar? Has it got a seat at the root cause table? Does it get an honorary mention, perhaps? What do people think? We went through 3, went through correlative, bang on, mechanistic, bang on, experimental, bang on. So now you know 11 or 12 weeks ago, where it suddenly disappeared from my table, okay? Okay, so fat, well let's have a look at fat. We're good on time, I think, and fat will be a bit faster because there isn't as much in there, surprisingly. Really quick, you've got the saturated fats, and they're the meats, the butters, avocados are full of saturated fat. You got the unsaturated. Now the triglyceride we mentioned earlier is here. Triglyceride is a glycerol backbone, kind of a sugar backbone, and 3 fatty acids coming off it. They're saturated, the carbons all have 4 bonds fully utilised. Unsaturated, monounsaturated, has 1 carbon double bond. It's missing 2 hydrogens. It bends the molecule, it makes it liquid at room temperature. Polyunsaturates then will just have multiple double bonds. That's all really. These are the triglycerides in your fat cells. When you're burning fat, you're getting a bunch of sugar out and you're getting a load of free fatty acids, and you're burning those in your muscles and your heart and your body. Okay? But they're the types. So mono, poly, and saturated. These are natural. These are monounsaturated, which are seen as very health beneficial olive oils. These are kind of man-made generally, or pulled out of vegetable kernels. These are the vegetable oils, linoleic and arachidonic acid. And we won't get into those, but they have some interesting stuff around them. And here's your great omega-3 fish oils. They're the good ones. Correlation is not causation, but no correlation and anti-correlation has a serious causation problem. Okay? I'll just remind you the correlation for the sugars in the same 50-year period. There you have it. Oh, I can tweak the data, I can fiddle around in Excel, but it's not going to change anything. That's from the US database. Okay, so there's our correlation, and to be honest, I don't really have more slides on correlation. But people are probably wondering, why then? Why the fat? And I do subscribe to the Harvard Medical Press. It comes from Harvard Medical School. They think I'm a doctor, but I just signed up to it. They say, I just say,
You're not a doctor.
forget everything I said. So I just say, they say, dear Ivor, your patients may benefit from blah blah blah. But it's just a letter. But it's interesting. I can't put it up back on the wall, right? But no, one of the things 2 weeks ago, it was quite funny, was they said, find out how leading edge doctors no longer advise low fat diets. So again, this is not niche, it's just probably zeitgeist. And I think in 10 or 15 years, this will become normal, and you're just getting a preview. A lot of really good people on the edge of this. So, and the Harvard Medical School as well. So why did they say the fat? Well, there's a guy called Ansel Keys in the 50s, and he created the K rations. He's a nutritionist kind of thing. But he was very popular, and the K rations in the war were hugely beneficial. So he was obsessed with fat in the diet caused blood fats, and they didn't have all the science. And that caused the heart disease. He was obsessed. He travelled all over Europe looking at stuff, and he travelled with his wife, and they looked at all the populations, what they're eating. And he was fixated that the calories from fat in populations correlated, or should correlate, or had to correlate. So he did what I suppose, well, we often do as engineers, you judge. He took the 6 and 7 countries study, and he ignored all the other countries that didn't correlate. And he published the 6 and 7 country study, and they are still referred to this day in studies in the last decades. They are referred back to as the basis science that informs the current. They're still referred to.
What's the y-axis there?
Oh, it's coronary heart disease, CHD, per 1,000. It's the rate of coronary heart disease. So now the problem is, in rich countries, coronary heart disease will correlate with the GDP, it'll correlate with loads of stuff, it'll correlate with radio television licenses. But he decided it had to be that. He was challenged lots of times about people who eat over 50% saturated fat, and their heart disease was non-existent, and they had excellent health. And he said those populations are irrelevant. He never explained why, never gave a mechanism. Just, they're irrelevant. Okay, they're relevant. He got into Time magazine, the front cover, as the father of the heart lipid hypothesis, and it went from there. What can I say? He could have picked, out of the 22 countries, he could have picked lots of different groups of 6. He could have picked this group of 6, Switzerland, Germany, no. Could have picked this one. Look at that. Or Israel, Austria, Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands, Norway. Yeah, higher fat is better. Someone did a little calculation for the laugh. There were 200,000 ways you could pick 6 countries, and less than 10% of them showed the correlation. And he picked the best one. So there you have it. So that's just a matter of history. Here's what Yudkin was fighting at the time, but the commission in the US in the 70s took on board, and Ansel Keys was on the commission, and they decided that fat was bad based on a correlation. So where's B and C? Where's the mechanistic? Where a lot of scientists, there was a whole panel set up who said we cannot do this based on a correlation, because the radios correlate better. Went ahead. Judkins was sent back packing to England and basically simmered for the next 10 or 20 years, but probably had the pleasure of knowing he was right, but he was basically thrown out. And here's some recent data, 1998. Okay, this is a lot of countries around Europe. I just picked this off from a report. What do you think, saturated fat? Would you be terrified to live in France and eat 15% saturated fat in your diet?
No.
I'd be happy enough. This is the French paradox, by the way. Now, when you have paradoxes all over the place, they're no longer paradoxes. But this is, for the fat theoreticians, this is a paradox. Something else. They're drinking wine or whatever. Anyway, there you are. My suspicion is Azerbaijan and Georgia is probably more wheat-related as the heart disease, but there you have it. So the orthodox view. Anyway. Dietary fat, this guy, Michael Gurr, PhD, he's written the preeminent book on biochemistry, and he criticises the degree of self-delusion in research workers wedded to a particular hypothesis despite the contrary evidence. And this is the hypothesis sticky I said earlier. The data's not there. I've read reports where the summary says something, and I've looked through the data and I've downloaded and purchased the raw. It's not there. He did this in a 50-page, I recommend the article, excellent. He pulled out from the 7 biggest studies that kind of concluded that fat was bad, somehow. And he pulled out the people who experienced no coronary event and the grams per day fat they had. And then the ones who did. basically saying that he can't explain it, but the hypothesis is so sticky that the only answer can be from these studies that fat is bad. I mean, you know, a lot of money goes into them, maybe tens of millions of dollars. They can't come out with some complete, hold on, all those other studies are wrong and everyone now says it's not. So what they do is they keep the chain going. But the chain is breaking, and the chain is falling apart. As you, from the Harvard Medical Review, they're now changing. But it's going to change slowly because a huge, huge edifice has been built on this, from Ansel Keys up. And you can't knock down a big building quickly, you know, cause a lot of damage. So it's going to have to be deconstructed in a controlled manner. And that'll be the next decade or two. Okay? Here is 2010, a meta-study across all the biggest heart studies of all time with fat, that all generally are quoted in the media as saying that, yeah, that's bad. I won't even read out the summary. Well, I will. There is no significant evidence for concluding that dietary saturated fat is associated with increased risk of coronary heart disease or coronary vascular disease. More data are needed to elucidate whether coronary vascular disease risks are likely to be influenced by the specific nutrients used to replace fat. Yeah? Like carbohydrate maybe and sugar. Okay, there it is. It's a wash. Because these studies, you know, aren't perfect, they get all kinds of, sometimes they show fat a bit worse, sometimes less, but there you are, you're straight one. You did a study like this on some other things we talked about, you might see a slightly different result. Okay, fat mechanistic data, to be honest, there's not much out there because they seem to like to just do correlations. Yes, if you force feed yourself lots of fat, you know, you will create blood fat too, through different mechanisms. But in the absence of sugar and carbs to spike the insulin, you won't even have the appetite for it. So to be honest, it's kind of, there just isn't much there. But we will look at some fat experimental data, which is better. Here's some excellent work from Krause et al., big team. And what they did is they wanted to go in and show that low fat diets were kind of good. And they measured all the major risk factors we talked about, the HDL, the trig reduction. But what they saw is what I kind of knew they'd see because I've studied a lot of it, and you see that they dig every time. For the first 3 weeks, they did a isocalorific. So they kept the calories the same for all the groups, okay? So they didn't try and diet or any of that funny stuff. They just said, we'll switch the components of what you're eating. And the red line is the low fat, your classic low fat, which is high carb because your protein's going to stay around the same. There's only so much protein you can eat. So the 3 weeks, what happened was, oops, the triglyceride reduction was massively better in increasing levels as you went to the highest fat diet, including the one with a lot of saturated fat. You can do this again and again, right? And after a starvation period of making people have 1,000 less calories per day, then the low-fat diet began to catch up, but it still didn't reach, just 3 weeks with no dieting, with the high-fat diet. You can imagine the guys with the problem with this report. What are they going to say, like? They can't come out and say, well, actually, high fat is better, because that wasn't the idea, right? So they're part of the long chain over 4 decades. They can't, constants. So I'll tell you what they said in a minute. So here they had the HDL good cholesterol, right? Actually dropped. And this is, there are mechanisms for this. So very high carbohydrate can drop your HDL. You know sugar can drop your HDL. It's sold on the hepatocyte diagram. But the high fat, yeah, jumped up. And then starvation period, the low fat kind of just about caught up, right? But here, these are sailing off into the distance for HDL, which is very important, much more important than LDL, much more important. You've got your total cholesterol over HDL, right? This is a good metric, way better with the high fat, low carbohydrate diet. ApoB over ApoA, master marker, this one's the biggie. 3 weeks, and you asked there how fast you can do this stuff, well, there you go, 3 weeks. Massive. If I had got a nuclear magnetic resonance test of my particles 3 weeks from when I started, yeah, I would bet I would far lower small dense particles because the high fat and the starvation of sugar and carbs cause much change in the particle size to the ones you want. So there it is. And finally here, the LDL particle diameter. So I said earlier, it's not the LDL. If you have a 4.0 LDL and a 6.2 total, you've got 2.2 HDL, and you got 4 of LDL. That's fantastic because the ratio is very good, your HDL is high, and the LDL is probably full of good LDL. But here's the LDL particle diameter. So bigger is much better. Smaller is atherogenic, smaller goes under the endothelium, brings cholesterol into the arterial wall, your body's immune systems attack it, it gets oxidized, creates foam cells, and closes down the artery, and can break out and cause blockages, right? Small dense LDL. But here's bigger LDL. Shown in here as well as a low-carb ketogenic diet, which I essentially be on, is you produce ketones instead of glucose to run your body a lot of the time. And again, that's even higher. So the starvation period, in fairness, the low-fat diet catches up after a period of starvation. So what you would conclude from that, or what I would, was low sugar, refined carb particularly, not good carbs like vegetables. I eat mountains of vegetables, right? Low refined white flour carbs, no sugar. High fat diet dramatically improves the key metabolic syndrome disease markers. I mean, it's just like, what else could you conclude? The authors concluded a low fat diet with restricted calories sort of kind of gets within range of the high fat diet and the key mets markers. Yeah? I'm serious. I read the sentence. Jeff Volek did a piece on this, and he said the work they did was excellent. The problem is, unfortunately, their summary would be read as a low-fat diet is kind of good. It's kind of yeah, it's good. So that's, I mean, if you got caught doing that here, you know. Yeah. Anyway, so there you have it. This can be. Huh? Okay. So this can be done again and again, and I'm just going to show. There's loads of this out here. It happens again and again. Here's Volek's work. It was done 30 years ago by Finney, Dr. Finney, his doctor and PhD, and Volek's PhD. They were doing this 30 years ago and saying, trying to wake up. Wake up, guys. This is the way to affect the real markers. And now there's a lecture series by Dr. Finney, and he's a sprightly 70-something-year-old who's been living like this, and he's bouncing around the stage. You know, he's in great shape. But he basically said, okay, it's 25 years late, but you know what, it's nice to see it's finally coming true. So I'm okay with it, but it was frustrating for a long time. So here's the percent change. Glucose blood sugar down on low carb, high fat diet. Insulin way down. Insulin, the master hormone you want, down, down, down. Blood pressure down, very fast, as we said. Triglycerides, way down. HDL up. Low fat diet, no good for HDL, but you need fats for HDL. Here's other markers here. We've got the leptin way down, which is good. Okay, we mentioned leptin earlier. Appetite control, very low carb ketogenic diet comes way down. The homeostasis model assessment, it's a kind of a measure of inflammation, miles down compared to a low fat diet. Insulin way down, glucose way down, small LDL particles well down, ApoB over ApoA well improved, or ApoN. Triglyceride over HDL, which is the master predictor from our current cholesterol tests that we use. If you don't have the nuclear magnetic test, way improved, right? And that's it. I'm not sure what I have after that because we've gone through the three pillars. Here's just a good, from Gary Taubes, wrote a good book on how insulin works and how we get fat and all. And I just thought it was a nice little graph. It just kind of showed, you know, when things changed and what happened. So it's kind of a smart arse graph, you know, but I think the content hopefully I've showed is more compelling than just looking at this, because this is just correlation. It's a nice correlation. Okay, see the fat comes down, carb goes up, protein flat, boom. Okay, concluding material. How are we in time? We've got 5 minutes. There's only 5 minutes left. I said 90 minutes. And then we can have some questions. Okay. If you can turn it on and turn it off, you got it, right? Remember that, Ian? So what if you could make rats perfectly reflect the metabolic syndrome in human? And they do. They get 4 out of 5 by feeding them fructose. That's what they do. That's how you make metabolic syndrome rats to try out human drugs. You feed them fructose. Now the guys who are doing this and feed the fructose, they're not thinking, geez, we should probably tell someone this. They're just thinking we want to make the rats very metabolic syndrome. So they represent humans, but they feed them fructose. Okay? These guys in 2013, I found this and purchased it. Great report. They're really excited because they can add the 5th metabolic syndrome constituent, because they've got a special feedstuff for rats. Refined wheat flour. So if they add fructose and refined wheat flour, the HDL goes all to hell. They collapse their good cholesterol. They also are selling their idea for drug tests because they did this in 4 weeks instead of the usual 3 months. So they accelerated the degeneration into metabolic syndrome. Fructose and refined carbohydrate wheat flour. So I think that's a good way to end it. I won't go through the graphs, you know, but it's the same stuff as before. All the bad goes up, all the good goes down. That's it. More rat tails, you can read some of that there. Recent work in the Princeton Neuroscience Institute, same kind of stuff. They just explode them. Male rats ballooned, They're proving this, but there's massive resistance against it because sugar is an economic backbone, it's a very strong industry, and you know, the fat is easy to say is bad because no one really gets hurt. So, you know, there you are. Here's the guidelines. You can call sugar lots of stuff and it keeps it down the ingredient list in the US. You know, if you just call it sugar, it'd be right up the top. So you basically hide it. It's synonyms. In Ireland and in the EU, you need to show the percentage sugar on the front, so at least you can make a choice. Here's the guidelines. What happens when loads of different regulatory bodies have massive difference in guidelines for something? It means they don't really know. It's not a conspiracy that they're paid off. They don't really have a clue because the work hasn't been done. It's only being done now. Here's the spoons of sugar from the American Heart Association. I couldn't agree with them more. A maximum of 9 spoons in a day for a male adult, 6 for a female. I think they're absolutely right. And their internal memos suggest that they see this as a maximum, but they don't want to go lower because it will seem too excessive, right? Here's the other guidelines, the other agencies. I'm not sure about Institute of Medicine, who informs the US government. There was a 10 in this, but I looked at their website and it seems to indicate 25%, so, you know, but there's a general indicator. Don't think you eat much sugar. There's the American Heart, 9.5 for an adult male. The average child is 32 teaspoons. Traditionally, over millions of years, we would have had 1.5. Adults are actually taking less because the kids are drinking all the sports drinks, right? Okay. Here's your breakfast. You can get up to 18 or 19 spoons with a big bowl of health cereal, big glass of orange juice, and a smoothie. Right? That's 2 to 3 times the daily guidelines for an adult, and 12 times the average evolutionary intake before you leave the breakfast table. That's where it comes. You eat a big ready meal stuffed with sugar. You eat diet yogurts later on, they're stuffed with sugar. Diet yogurts, they take out the fat and they put in sugar. So you take out the fat, it tastes like cardboard. Put back in sugar. All diet products and low-fat products tend to be stuffed with sugar. So you're taking away something that's not really a problem, and you're filling it up with something that is. Okay? N equals 1 experiment. Right? Look at this guy. He's got an appetite dysfunction. Look at that. He said he'll come near him, he's going to kill him. Yeah. See this? They're not muscles. They're a half inch of a subcutaneous adipose tissue. Right? Black eyes, you know. And I had crabs as well back then. Chili crab, pepper crab, delicious. Highly recommend. This is in Jumbo Seafood in Singapore. Great, great evening, you know. But that was just at the start of my diet. Okay.
You look happy, Ira.
Well, that's another thing. You are much happier. It's not to do with the weight as such. It's to do with the energy levels. You know? My wife is transformed as well. She ate very little sugar.
Oh, yeah. I'll be on there.
No, but in terms of energy, she used to wonder, how did they in the 50s have big families and do all the work without being exhausted and waves of crashing? The reason is well anyway, they ate different stuff. Okay, so here's my GGT, a very big marker for mortality. This is the one that started me off. I conversed with the director of the Iron Institute in the States back at the start of my voyage, and I put out my thesis, and she said, you're bang on point. All the stuff with the carbohydrate, the fat, and all the mechanisms. So I knew then I'd probably going to get good bloods in 8-9 weeks' time. She's writing a book on GGT and diet, and it's a carb-restricted work for her as well. Dropped it right down. So anyway, I'm down to 35. That was my stretch goal. But I might head towards 20 now because the risk levels are really low there. Ferritin, serum ferritin synergistically acts with GGT in ways that are complex I won't get into here. So having both of them high is worse than having each of them high together. The iron causes oxidation, the GGT causes a lack of prevention, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. 230, 360 is the upper range for normal population. I was way high, so I got that down. And again, I want to aim lower. HDL, the good HDL, 1.73. That's on the edge of the population. That's right up there. They say it should be above 1. I would say 1.5, you know, because it's shifted to the bad area with the modern populations because of what we're eating. So they kind of shift the guideline. I'd say 1.5. Trigs down to 0.78. You can't really go much lower than 0.5, you know. I wasn't that bad anyway in June, July. I didn't know because I didn't get these results until I went looking for them when I was getting the second set. But I wasn't that bad, but I certainly improved on what was already good markers. Trigs over HDL, great marker, down to 1, they say below 2. Down at 1. Total cholesterol ratio to HDL, very good marker. 4.5, it should be better then. I was 4.5. Down below 4 is really good, really good. So I'm 3.5. So Neville Wilson's delighted. Right?
Is your GGT, is there a glucose?
No, it's gamma glutamyl transferase. It's the liver enzyme that's quite it's kind of linked in with the metabolic syndrome, and it's predictive of early mortality. And it causes, like at very high levels I was at, you might have a 20 times the chance of liver cancer and 6.5 times the heart disease. But when you do a statistical regression in the studies and you back out all the other factors people often have as well, it's a weaker predictor on its own. But it's still a predictor. And for me, it was a master marker. Okay, we got the blood pressure I mentioned. Yeah, very happy with the blood pressure. Right now it's probably through the roof because, you know, whatever. But the resting blood pressure. Weight is, yeah, around 82.5, wouldn't bother going below 82. 5K run time. People wonder about energy on this diet. Oh, you need carb for energy. I did 2 5K runs in 4 months, right? I did 2 of them just to see. My best ever with 6 months of triathlon training at the weight I ran these ones at, right, was 23.7 minutes for 5K. That was 6 months training and doing Olympic triathlons. Here I did a 24.5 and I hadn't run in around 2 months. So there's no question about energy. Now very intense activity requires carbohydrate, very intense, but not running like at a reasonable rate. And the waist again, I'd say 32, down from around 35. Okay? There we are. All my friggin' clothes are useless now, and I don't have the money to replace them. Maybe I'll get a stipend from this talk. You know?
Harvey, you look like a young Bruce Willis up there.
What can I do? Anyway, no, it's the bloods though, in fairness. The bloods were the target, and I am delighted with the bloods. Here is just an indicator of the kind of stuff I would eat all the time. I have no problem with the boringness of it. I have no problem with eating that stuff. I love it. And there is buckets of stuff I can eat that I love eating. No problem. This is the kind of stuff that would have been a lot in our house. You won't see it anymore. Not the wheats, not the pastas, not the breads. A bit of pasta, a bit of rice now and then, but not the big carb, simple carb stuff. Milk chocolate, 50% sugar, 50% fat. If you take in high sugar, your insulin spikes. It's going to ram the dietary fat into fat storage. So it's a double whammy in its own self. So I eat high cocoa, it's only 12% sugar. Cream, no problem. Camembert, olives, snacks at night. Fruit here and there. Nuts as snacks during the day. None of this crap. And again, big fatty salads for lunch. Vegetables in there. Tons of veg at dinner. You know, meat and fish, yeah, but a lot of veg. For a little potato. Used to eat a load of spuds. Pile them up. Okay, breakfast, yeah, fries, omelettes, maybe a tin of sardines when I'm feeling healthy. Good omega-3 fats. The last.
Red wine.
Huh? Oh, red wine, yes, yes. Oh, the GGT as well is correlated with alcohol, but usually when you're a higher BMI, alcohol increases your GGT dramatically. If you're a low BMI, it doesn't. So I kind of knew that as well, and I figured I'd lower the GGT without lowering the wine. That was my target. So I'm at 35 now, and I drink the same, like, few glasses, kind of, each evening with my dinner or watching telly. So I'm delighted with that. Okay, I think that's kind of it. And I know we started 15 minutes late, so hopefully it wasn't too boring.
Do your children follow that diet then as well? Do you recommend for kids?
Oh, kids. Well, Sinead, do you eat that diet? More or less, yeah. I mean, there's one, Ruth, my second eldest, Sinead told me lately she tries to seek and she sneakily get hold of some sugar. But generally they go with it, because they've been listening to me all the time, and in fairness they know, okay, there's something to this, you know, and the long-term effects. But it's, you know, you're...
Just the thing, my sister actually really likes Rice Krispies in Ireland. Because I tell you, because in Ireland they put more sugar than in Spanish Rice Krispies. The same brand, Kellogg's. They actually put more sugar in their studios in the UK than they do in the continent.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, you know, when...
Oh yeah.
Because you were showing the countries as well, where the uptake of sugar versus...
Yeah, there will be variations there, and even in fast food as well, there's different components. The cereals have got a lot of sugar in them. I mean, even the standard cereals, I won't get into brands, but the standard generic cereals are 20% sugar.
Yeah.
Right? The sugary cereals are 55 to 60% sugar. I mean, it's just insane, right? You know, you're taking, in a bowl of those cereal, you're taking 5 to 10 times what we had for millions of years in one go, in one bowl. And you don't even think you are, because it's all kind of, you know, fibre and crunchy stuff. It's full of sugar, laced with sugar. The one that's not is shredded wheat. There's very little sugar. But then it's got a lot of wheat in it too, and wheat it's got some question marks over it significantly. We won't get into that here. So yeah, I think the key thing is when you switch completely, you can control it yourself. You know, you're the person in the chemical plant where everything's working, and the systems that were designed millions of years work very well are working. And you just sit in the control room and you just keep an eye on things. If you eat the wrong stuff, it's shot to shit. So the whole chemical plant is kind of all over the place. And you're there running around trying to control. Another great example, if you want to control your weight and you're eating the wrong stuff, it's really easy. And it speaks to the calories in, calories out thing. You just need to eat the exact right calories for the next 20 years. If you eat 20 more calories a day, too much, you'd be very overweight in 20 years. Humans can't use their brain 24 hours a day to be plus or minus 20 calories every day. We're busy, we have stuff to do. We couldn't do it anyway. You have to let the machine control it for you. And if you want the machine to control it for you, you can't throw crap in the machine because it screws up the control system. And that's why I put all those loops in. That's the thing. You must put the right substrate in so the machine can regulate itself. Then you can hold your hand on the rudder and direct it. And I guess that's my learning. It won't apply to everyone, I guess, but there's several friends who are doing it now, you know, are blown away. Yeah, and the question was, is the lifestyle worth it? The lifestyle change good, and will you keep it forever? And I'd say,
It's really the impact on the rest of us.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I fully, and I know people always promise and they say to themselves, you know, I'm going to give up smoking, I'm going to do this, and then they break it. I don't see this in that bracket. Once you know the science, how can I go back? I can't go back. I know how it all works. I couldn't bring myself to go back. No way. Look at the bloods. I wouldn't bring my bloods back to bad.
Ivor, did you actively increase the fats as well as
Not
reduce the
really.
sugars, or just left them alone?
You take out the sugar, you take out the refined carbs, and the rest just balanced. So I'm eating olives, I'm eating cheese, it just naturally balances back. It's not like an Atkinsy, you know, eating live cattle kind of thing, as you can see. It's, it's a good question though. You take out the bad stuff and then let it be kind of filled back in. We need energy from somewhere. And is there an end button here? I've got some extra material there. Oh, sorry. It is probably worth looking at this, yeah. Oh, here's your cholesterol particles, by the way, but that's a separate talk. Phospholipids. That's next week. No, we can't. But if you all get more productive because you're healthier, this will be worth it. Here, so that's it. The diet, it just looks after itself once you much more stop the bad rather than inflate the so-called good. Yeah.
Ivor, if you were binge eating, say, one day a week and you follow the diet, rest, would that work? Is the system you have to cope with that?
That'd be probably, like, around once a week if we go to a restaurant, I might even have pizza and all. I won't have a soft drink because that's just ludicrous. But I will have a pizza and, you know, I'll have maybe dessert and all that stuff around once a week.
Beer, what's your thoughts on beer then?
Beer, I've gone out, yeah, I'd still go out and have a good few pints occasionally, but I don't really go much, it's mostly wine. And sometimes in a pub as well. I know it doesn't go down that well with the bunch, but sometimes I do have a glass of wine instead of beer.
White or red, and can you drink white wine or
Well, red wine is marginally better because of the constituents in it. But to be honest, yeah, wine, I mean, alcohol is not good, and it goes the same place as fructose does. You know, once it's in reasonable moderation, and wine is better than beer because beer brings in a lot of liquid carb as well as the alcohol. So that's my perception. So I'd be wine rather than beer, you know. And big amounts of beer give the beer belly, which speaks to the whole mechanisms we're talking here. It's the same kind of thing, you know. That's probably it. On time.
Good job.
Okay.
Are you sending all the slides there, Ivor?
I'm not quite yet. I sent out a selection of slides to illustrate some of the stuff and with links. I'm just, I'm still working through it. Thank you. Is there a book signing? There's no book signing, but just leave me your number. I'll ring you when the time comes.